So, we have big problems with American police. If you've been paying attention to the news the last month or so, it's pretty obvious, and it's something that recurs over and over and over again. The people who really study this problem the deepest, and the people who run police agencies, are very much convinced that there are three really big problems facing them, and they're their main focus right now. One of them is budgets. Police departments across the country, all 18,000 of them, are grossly understaffed because of the recession. A lot of them have had 25%, 30%, even 50% of their staff cut. So that's the first one, that's budgets. Another major problem that policing is stuck with right now is that the public doesn't trust them. They don't perceive them very well, and they don't think they get justice from the police or even civility, oftentimes. Okay. And then the third one, and this is a new one because people haven't paid much attention to this in the past, is officer safety and health and wellness. All right, so we've got those three. They're focused on them. There are big initiatives underway to try and ameliorate those problems. But there's a fourth problem that connects to each of those three, that if we don't deal with it, we'll never deal fully with all three of those problems. And it's been ignored for a very long time. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. No, I am. And that's police fatigue. We normally think about this as just part of the background. That's the way cops are. You see them that way in the movies. You see them that way on TV. But it's not natural, and I'll tell you why. Okay. Make sure I've not forgotten anything in all of this. All right. So the other thing I want to get across to you that I think is terribly important is if you're going to deal with these big problems and the big problem of fatigue that affects each of them, you don't necessarily need a whole big new bureaucracy. You don't need a big program. You don't need all kinds of brand new things. We really know how to deal with these problems now. We need to deal with them on a local level because each of those 18,000 police agencies has its own ecology. Each of your communities has different rhythms and ways of doing things it needs, right? So we just need things make sense, are relatively thrifty, and that work locally where policing is done. So let's think about who cops are for a second. 24/7, these are the folks who run toward danger instead of away from it, like somebody with some common sense would do, right? They wrestle drunks, they deal with injured children, they give you a ticket every now and again. We hire them, we empower them to make arrests, to stop people and challenge them. We obligate them, we require them to use force if necessary to enforce the law or protect people. And then the other thing that we have to do, because when you give somebody this much power, when you delegate that to them, if you want to retain your freedom, you also have to hold them accountable for what they do, right? You have to hold them accountable for their actions. So that's how you maintain justice in the community. Let's look at the flip side of that for a second, though. What about justice in the workplace? These people, the cops, are our employees. We're obligated to provide them with a safe and healthy work environment as much as we can. We need to give them the tools and the training to do their job properly. And when we do hold them accountable for what they do, we need to give them what's called due process of law. We have to treat them justly and according to the rules. Okay. So that's how we normally think about this, and that should be the end of this paragraph, except it's not, because there's one more piece that people often forget. And that's this basic idea that if you're going to hold someone accountable, if you're going to say, you must do this, then you have to be able they have to be able to do it, right? It's unjust if you're expecting things from people that they can't do. All right. So we've had research on justice and police performance. I've worked for the last 25 years since I stopped being a cop in midlife and went back to get a Ph.D. I've worked at this intersection of justice and human performance, the place where we try and look at what's possible for people to really do so justice can be there. And I'm going to give you a couple of quick examples of, well, you'll see what they are of. So you often, and I've heard it several times now these last weeks over the Ferguson case, and a similar case in St. Louis. Why can't you just shoot the gun out of his hand? Why did the cops have to kill him? That's a reasonable thing to ask. Even the bad guys are somebody's son or brother or sister or mother. But the problem is with that, I mean, we could pass laws that say cops must do their very best to shoot the gun out of someone's hand. But I've got some bad news for you. It's not like on TV or in the movies where, Bruce Willis can do that in a second, right? Well, the limits of human performance mean that you can't always hit someone that accurately, especially when you're ducking and diving and trying to figure out what the hell's going on in a fraction of a second often. Trying to employ this weapon, and you've got to make a decision now, not later when you've got enough information. You have to choose and do something. And so in that setting, handguns aren't very accurate. And handguns themselves, that tool we give them, also aren't accurate enough. There are too many movable joints here, right? In between that weapon and the target. So that's one. This is a hypothetical situation, but it's asked all the time. People have expectations that the police will use a minimum level of force, but their expectations of what minimum is often are outside the bounds of reality. Let me give you a more practical, everyday thing that you may not be thinking about. This is a modern police car. Isn't it wonderful? We have a laptop, we have multiple radios, we have radar guns, we have GPS, we have cell phones, all these other devices jammed into the car wherever they won't fall over, rather than following any ergonomics or anything like we would with an aircraft, for example. And we know that distraction affects your driving performance. In my lab, what we've found is if you put distraction together with being tired, you're 10 times more likely to have a collision. Not a good thing, right? And we recognize that. So most states have distracted driving laws, but we exempt police and other emergency drivers from those laws because we know it's really not possible to do this safely. Unfortunately, we can't exempt them from the laws of physics. And the laws of physics mean that as many cops die every year on the roadway, not usually driving in an emergency way, just doing routine driving. Lots of those accidents are distracted. And you get cases like this one in the corner. Like it was 2007, state troopers going 126 miles an hour, talking on a cell phone, and had been texting before he crashed. Well, that was stupid. But he crashed into two sisters, killed both of them. So this isn't just a problem of workplace justice. What cops do affects safety on the streets. So just think about this. In a nutshell, cops work too much, they get too little sleep. It's hard working shifts and overtime and going to court during the day to get enough sleep. The prevalence of fatigue among police is very, very high. The majority of police officers, when I ask a crowd, How many of you have ever worked more than 24 hours in a day? All the hands go up. How about 36? A lot of hands go up. If you've been awake for 17 hours, we know from 4 good studies now, that's about the equivalent of a blood alcohol content of 0.05, which in Europe will get you arrested for drunk driving. Okay, so this has a fundamental effect on your ability to perform as a human being. In terms of those 3 big problems, right quick, let's flip them on their heads. Or let's look at community in the first place. Who is it that connects with you and communicates with you and builds your trust better? Is it officer friendly, who speaks to you kindly and looks you in the eyes and does all the things that we do to connect with one another? Or is it officer tired and cranky? When I was first starting this line of research and I had a grad student I wanted to involve in it, and I asked her to do it, and she said, I explained it to her, and she said, wait a minute, you mean nobody's ever noticed that tired cops get cranky like everybody else, but they're cranky people with guns and clubs? And no one had. It was, anyway. So that's the impact of fatigue on public perceptions of the police side of it. In terms of officer safety and health, over the short term, when you're too tired, it interferes with your ability to do the basic things we demand of a police officer. Comfort an injured child, go give somebody a ticket, turn right around and deal with another complicated situation, and then go separate 2 drunks in a domestic relationship who've been fighting all their lives, and do it with finesse. Being too tired affects all of the things that allow you to do that. It also affects your ability to hold your temper, to not feel as threatened or more anxious like you do when you're tired compared to when you've got enough rest. And that affects your performance in deadly encounters. Over the long term, it also affects your overall health, because sleep disruption and not getting enough sleep affects your immune system. It suppresses its actions. And that means that cops disproportionately get cancers, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders like OG was talking about a minute ago. Okay, all of these things, along with psychological disorders. There's many cops kill themselves every year as they're killed by both violent crimes and the driving collisions. So we've got those 3 big problems that we deal with, and the basic problem underneath them is that as you work cops harder, you wear them out, more of them get sick, more of them burn out, and you have fewer cops to throw at the problems you have. So you overwork them some more, and that leads to a vicious cycle where you have fewer and fewer people available to do the job, and you work them harder and harder, and you break them and burn them out. Oakland Police Department right now has an absenteeism rate of about 46%. Think about trying to run a business like that. So the good news, though, if a vicious cycle makes it go this way, you can turn that around. If you can start making things better and slowing that rate of decline, you can create what's called a virtuous cycle. And here are 6 things, not all of the things we know now that we can do, but these are 6 things you can do. One of them, labor and management don't have to bicker over this problem. They've both got a stake. An executive has to manage risk, and an executive has to conserve human capital, right? And if you're a labor organization and you're not protecting safety and health, then you're not doing your job properly. Just running through these quickly because I'm out of time almost. Poor sleep, screen them for sleep disorders and treat them. Train them how to sleep better. Shift work, train them how to manage shift work. Improve your scheduling. Lower the shift length, because the longer you're on duty, the more dangerous it is. Fatigue at work, you can wear a little device on your wrist. All of my research subjects do that measures exactly how much sleep I've had, and I can put that through a mathematical model, and I can say, this is how tired you are now, and that's how tired you'll be tomorrow at this time of day, or the next day after that. Overwork, put your staff where they belong, staff as well as you can. But the last one, that understaffing keeps coming up, right? That's the source of this problem. We need, for police chiefs all over the country, to figure out what the real costs of fatigue and overtime and understaffing are. Because these costs come out in injuries, accidents, errors of judgment, civil suits also. And so once you know that, you can go to the city council or whoever else controls the purse strings, and you can say, here's the business case for how many people I need. Do you want to pay the money to the lawyers? No offense to all the lawyers in the room. Or do you want to pay it to have enough people on the job? Straightforward. The other thing about this is, people sometimes will say, well, I can't do all that. Well, you don't have to do all of it. You have to start somewhere, do what you can, implement it, evaluate how well it's working, refine it, gradually spread the things you can do, and then repeat. You've got to be patient. Oftentimes, change takes a whole career course, 20 years or so. Big whoop. So did the highway system. So does every jet fighter plane we put together. So, we can reduce those three problems by managing this overlooked problem that's terribly important. We've got the science now, we're gaining the public support, and we've got support inside the policing organizations as well. This is something we can do now, and if we do it, we make each of those three problems better. But even more than that, we improve justice for all, people in the workplace, people on the streets in the community. Thank you.